So a friend of mine just got deported back to Canada for having an expired FMM. And I thought I would take this opportunity to talk about some do's and don'ts in terms of having an expired FMM, what you should do, what you should not do, and one slightly unconventional advice. But let's start with absolutely make sure that you know when your FMM expires, okay? So when you get your FMM and they stamp your passport, all of that jazz, please make sure that you are able to read and fully understand what your FMM says, and if there's any doubt, ask right then and there. I feel like the German guy who got held and deported could have avoided all of his experience had he looked at the FMM. Now, I don't necessarily blame him. I think it is still kind of customary to assume the 180, but that's just not the world we live in right now. And so instead of assuming, look at the FMM, right? So that's just the base. But let's say here you are in Mexico with an expired FMM. What should you do? Advice number one, leave Mexico. The FMM is letting you know that you have X number of days, up to 180 days, to be in Mexico. The proper thing to do when your FMM expires or as it's expiring is to leave the country. So if you find yourself in a situation where you are now in the red, you could choose to simply leave the country. I would specifically suggest a direct route, meaning you're not going to be crossing through state borders. You're not going to be, I'm going to take a trip to Mexico City, hang out in Mexico City for a few days and then fly out. Advice that I would recommend, if you're able to, just leave the country. That's the intention of the FMM. So when you find yourself expired, you could just leave. High chance that you're going to pay a fine. The fine is generally not that much, 600 to 700 pesos a person, and then you just leave. You leave for at least 3 days. And then if you want to come back to Mexico, you come back to Mexico. Pretty simple. Now I say it's pretty simple, but obviously not everyone wants to leave Mexico. Some people really, really want to stay here and become a resident and kind of stay indefinitely, but maybe right now you can't become a Mexican resident because you don't have the finances or etc. Like you just can't apply. And especially if this is your first visit to Mexico, you don't yet qualify for the RNE program, which is what I'm doing. So I get it. If leaving is legitimately not an option, then advice number two is get a residency lawyer, such as Barby from Merida Moves, who you guys know I absolutely love, and she's the one helping me get my temporary residency through the RNE program. And while she is a Yucatan Merida specialist, even though I'm in Chiapas, I'm still calling her to get her advice because each state is a little bit different, and I find that the RNE program there helps more than the RNE program here. So that's why I'm choosing her. But there are obviously other lawyers, other immigration lawyers who can also help with this. So shop around, make sure. Guys, there's so many scams right now, so please make sure that you get a very reputable lawyer. Barby's the only one that I can vouch for on a personal level, but I'm confident she's not the only one that exists in Mexico, so definitely do your research on this one, but find an INM lawyer who can help you figure out the details. And I think as somebody who does not speak Spanish fluently, like just having somebody to help, it just makes the most sense. Although technically you could also, advice number three is to go to INM yourself. This is something that a lot of my friends here in Chiapas have been doing. They've just been going to INM, asking them what are their options, what can they do. Go to INM. Now, this advice would not necessarily fly in any other country but Mexico. But I have heard so many stories of people who are in the red. They're technically illegal, right? Here in Mexico, they could theoretically be deported, and instead of being caught by INM, they proactively go to INM, they tell them their situation, and I have yet to hear a single story, please let me know if you've heard of this story, but I've yet to hear a single story of somebody who proactively goes to INM, kind of self-reports and says, hey, I'm in the red, what can I do to fix this? I've yet to hear of somebody who gets sent to jail after that, who gets deported after that. I've only heard stories of INM saying a couple of options, either one, leave the country, even to the point where they advise you how to leave the country so that you are safe, so that you're able to leave the country safely without risk of being deported. That's pretty cool. Or two, I have heard of people extending visas. Now, I do not know the details, so please don't assume that going to INM will equal necessarily a visa being extended, but I have heard of people getting visas extended directly through INM. I have not heard of anyone in the red going to INM and being arrested or being deported. Instead, they've been given very wise advice on what to do. Like, INM is here to help you, honest to goodness. And while they're not going to break any laws for you, they're going to tell you how to get the things you want, the best way to get the things you want. Again, they might have bad news, meaning they might advise you to just leave the country. It might be that you don't qualify for any other program that they have. They might not be able to extend your current FMM. That's going to be up to INM. But what I'm very confident will not happen is an immediate arrest. If you know of any such story, please, please, please let me know in the comments below. I've yet to hear of that happening to anyone. So it's a little counterintuitive. If you're in any other country, if you're in the US and you're illegal, I kind of don't recommend that you go to immigration in the US. Like, I would say get a lawyer. But in Mexico, it doesn't seem to be their goal to arrest people. Now, my friend just got deported. So let's talk about advice number 4. If all of the above is something that you're just not willing to do, if you're not willing to leave the country, if you're not willing to talk to INM, and you're not willing to talk to a lawyer, then option number 4, very unconventional, is to stay where you're at. And there's a couple exceptions to this, but basically speaking, let's say you're in Merida and you're in the red. Let's say you're in San Cris and you're in the red. If you have no desire to be deported, if you have no desire to do the right thing and leave the country, contact INM or contact a lawyer. Do not go hopping around Mexico thinking that you can go wherever you want to. Like, it's just not safe. I'm not saying you can't go to the grocery store. I'm not saying you can't, live your life in a particular city in Mexico, but I am saying you cannot cross borders. You cannot go to another state. You can't hop around doing whatever you want in Mexico as if you're allowed to be here. For all intents and purposes, you need to hide and not do anything crazy. I'm not saying that you should stay in this condition forever. My assumption is that the reason that you're not willing to fly out of the country, the reason that you're not willing to go to INM/get a lawyer is probably financial. Yeah? You just don't have the budget necessarily to fly to another country, spend money on hotels, all of that jazz. Like, Mexico is very, very convenient to stay in. I get it. So 1, please don't put yourself in this situation in the first place. But 2, if it is the place that you happen to be in, hunker down, figure out how to make as much money as possible so that you can afford to become legal again, so that you can afford to leave the country, to pay for a lawyer. Lawyers, by the way, in Mexico are not super expensive, so it's not something I would necessarily be afraid of. At a minimum, contact and ask them what their services cost and get legal as soon as you can, right? Make money online, do the things you've got to do to get the money so you can become regular again, so you can become legal again. But don't get on an ADO bus, don't get on an OCC bus, don't leave the area thinking that that's something that you're allowed to do, because you're not. INM's not necessarily going to go knocking on every door to confirm visa status, but they will, in many parts of Mexico, check at the borders, and not just the border of the country, but the borders within the states. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Let's talk about those exceptions. If you are currently in a border city, I would almost count all of Quintana Roo as a very dangerous place to be, because Quintana Roo is such a weirdly shaped state that almost anywhere there is kind of on the border. So that's kind of a dangerous place to travel, really anywhere in Quintana Roo. And I think that's why you hear a lot of reports of that entire state holding people, checking people's visas, deporting people. Like, I think you hear a lot from that region because the shape of the state is such that you're kind of always near the border. If you happen to be in the Chiapas, being in, let's say, Tapachula, which is a popular border city, it's a place where apparently a lot of people from Guatemala start their entry into Chiapas so they can ultimately get to the US border city. In a place like Tapachula, it's actually kind of dangerous even to go to the grocery store without your passport, without your FMM, because border city. Now, San Cristobal, again, I am not necessarily saying don't walk around with your passport, but I am saying that I've never had my passport checked anywhere here. I've never had my passport checked anywhere in Merida. I've only had my passport checked crossing the locations, right? Coming from Merida to here. When traveling from Merida to San Cris, it's a national flight. You do have to show your passport. You don't technically have to show your FMM. However, I am in the habit of keeping my FMM and my passport together. And so When I crossed into San Cris, I've always shown my FMM at the same time. They just don't necessarily look at it. Karen, on the other hand, has been traveling from San Cris to like Mexico City, Guadalajara, all these places. You want to subscribe to her if you aren't already, but she has actually been not showing her FMM. She is legal, so it's not that she's afraid, but it's just not something that's required to be shown. And so in practice, she just hasn't been showing her FMM and she's been fine. That being said, anytime you cross the border, that's where INM lives. INM lives, if you will, at the border crossings. They live at the airport, and those are the places where you're most likely to have these things checked. So if you're not ready to leave Mexico, these are not places that you should be hanging out. So soon I'm gonna have permission to share my friend's entire story of how he got caught, how he got deported, his experience, all of that jazz. That will be coming up soon. But for now, let's just summarize. 1, know when your FMM is expiring. Leave the country as you are expected to leave the country before your FMM expires. If you're already in the red, contact a lawyer / contact INM to find out what your options are, and they're gonna have options that will not include jail time. And last but not least, if you're not ready to leave Mexico, enjoy the town that you're in, unless you're in a border town, in which case, higher chance that you're gonna be noticed and caught, but this is not the time to travel. This is the time to hunker down, increase your income so you can do the right thing and get legal. I also want to say one thing. If you happen to be a single mom, one of the things that I'm super careful about is never would I ever put my son in a situation where he might one day go to jail. Like, never. So as a single mom, option number 4 is really not an option. Getting legal, finding a lawyer, talking to INM, those are your options.